Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very exciting session today, which is a collaboration between the Fragility Forum and the Investing in Early Years Community of Practice. We are going to have a panel discussion today on meeting the unique needs of crisis-affected children and their families, with a special focus on the Ahlan Simsim program, which is the largest initiative of its kind in a humanitarian setting focused on early childhood development. And we will hear about their particular experiences in Lebanon with a distinguished panel that I will introduce in just a moment. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Rawlings. I'm a lead economist in the Human Capital Project at the World Bank, and I coordinate our work on the early years, which is an important collaboration that covers our vision for what it takes to have successful investments in young children in their earliest years. The focus on the early years has three pillars. The first is to have children who are healthy and well-nourished. The second pillar is to ensure that children receive quality early stimulation and learning. And the third pillar is that children are nurtured and protected from stress. We know that these elements are very important because they are the foundation for human capital. And human capital is critical to achieving the goals of ending extreme poverty and boosting shared prosperity that are at the heart of our mission here at the World Bank and embraced by the development community globally. We know that human capital is a primary driver of growth and that human capital is increasingly important as we face the needs of the workforce and the innovation necessary for the highly skilled jobs of the future. These gains in human capital are hard-won and important and under threat. They're under threat because of the COVID crisis today, which we'll have a chance to discuss a bit, and they are under threat particularly in situations of fragility and conflict and violence. So we very much welcome and thank you to Caroline and the entire Fragility Forum team for the partnership of being able to discuss these issues in the context of the Fragility Forum. In these settings of fragility, conflict, and violence, investments in young children is particularly critical and particularly difficult in terms of delivering these services in these settings. Many of the necessities that children need are likely to be disrupted at a minimum or even entirely absent for the duration of childhood. Basic nutrition and health can be of poor quality or non-existent. Preschools and other opportunities for early childhood education are also likely to be disrupted. And the socio-emotional stress borne by families in these contexts can have lifelong impacts on children's development, including stress on parents that can reduce their ability to provide positive responsive care. Maternal depression is another factor, and children's exposure to stress and violence in its most extreme form can even lead to toxic stress, which we know from the scientific literature disrupts healthy functioning of the brain, heart, and immune system and can compromise children during the course of their lifetime. At the World Bank, we're working very hard to strengthen that famous humanitarian development continuum, and the work that the Fragility Forum has been focused on is very much about bridging that alliance. And we need to work together with not only the international financial institutions, but the humanitarian institutions and the experts in their fields, such as Sesame Workshop, who can partner to help provide these important solutions. And together, we need to find scalable solutions for protecting and nurturing children in adversity. So that is why we are absolutely delighted today to welcome the experts from IRC, who will be speaking with us about their experience with the Ahlan Simsim program. This is the largest early childhood development initiative in the history of humanitarian responses, and it represents an important partnership between the International Rescue Committee, Sesame Workshop, and New York University that are providing the support for evaluation work. This partnership won the prestigious $100 million MacArthur grant in 2017 to carry out their work, and in 2018 they won another $100 million grant from the LEGO Foundation to continue this work. And this work aims, over the course of 5 years, to reach more than 1 million children through direct services and millions more through a new locally produced Arabic language version of Sesame Street that we will hear more about, that has been tailored to meet the needs of children in these violent and refugee settings. They have also expanded their work, which began with Syrian refugees across a number of countries in the Middle East, to now be working with Rohingya refugees as well, thanks to the LEGO Foundation grant. So let me now turn to introducing our distinguished panel, and I will then turn over to them. Our first speaker is Katie Murphy, who is the Senior Technical Advisor for Early Childhood Development at the International Rescue Committee. She is the brainchild behind the technical design of the Sesame Seeds Initiative, or I should say the Sesame Seeds Initiative is her brainchild, and she has worked across the developing world, including as a Peace Corps volunteer in El Salvador, working with IRC in Chad with the Darfur refugees. She has a master's in public health from the University of Pennsylvania, a master's in international education policy from Harvard University, and a Bachelor of Arts from Johns Hopkins. And we are delighted to have you with us today, Katie. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Chantal Callas. She leads the Ahlan Simsim's ECD project's goals to partner with local non-government organizations across the regions and to scale the program through embedding quality ECD programming into national systems. She has a master's degree in public health, health behavior and education, and a teaching diploma from the American University of Beirut. And speaking of the American University of Beirut, last but certainly not least, our last speaker will be Rana Saleh. Rana is a professor in the School of Public Health at the American University of Beirut. She is going to be leading the coordination of the program for addressing early childhood development needs in daycares as well as nurseries in Lebanon in collaboration with IRC. She has extensive experience in public health issues, including working with Syrian refugees. She is serving as a commissioner on the World Health Organization UNICEF Lancet Commission on realigning child health issues, and she has a master's degree in public health from the American University of Beirut and is also a licensed dietitian and a nutritionist. So without further ado, let me turn over to Katie and thank everyone for your participation today. Each presenter will speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you to all of the colleagues at the World Bank for inviting us to be part of this really important session. We're delighted to be here and extremely appreciative of this opportunity to discuss this important issue of early childhood development in fragile and complex settings. We see this as really the intersection of two critical issues of our time. First, conflict, crisis, and fragility, which we know is an issue that is increasingly affecting global populations. And then, of course, human development, which we know from decades of research and evidence is a critical in the formative first years of life, which are most influential for determining the life trajectory and lay the foundation for future health, behavior, and psychosocial well-being. And the scope of the problem is enormous. In 2018 alone, UNICEF reported that 29 million babies were born into crisis and conflict settings. And we know that this number is growing as this proportion of the population affected is increasing. And this represents approximately 20% of the population of children born in the world. And so what is it like for children who are experiencing early childhood in these settings? I think Laura really set this up very well, but we work with families around the world. We speak with parents, we speak with children, the parents who want nothing more than to see their children be happy, be healthy, be successful. Yet they worry because their children are facing compounding adversities. They're exposed to violence, they're exposed to malnutrition, insecurity, constant stress, and too often the caregivers themselves recognize that they're not able to provide them with the type of responsive, consistent, nurturing care that these young children require to thrive. And as Laura mentioned, this can result in what's called a toxic stress response, when the brain is continually flooded with stress hormones, and young children who aren't born with the ability of emotional regulation and don't have consistent caregivers who are able to provide them with that support are affected in terms of their brain architecture, and this has lifelong repercussions. We think about human development really as an equity issue, and I think this is aligned very much with the comments around the importance of focusing on our broader sustainable development goals and the effort to ensure equity for all, as we know that children who do not receive the types of supports and experiences required will not have the same life trajectory as those who have the types of protective factors and supports for children who are more advantaged. So we focus on reducing inequalities, both systemic factors and specific exposures that increase vulnerability and deepen inequalities. And we know that these are the factors that are really present in situations of conflict and crisis, where children are not receiving the responsive protective care or the early learning experiences that can help mitigate those experiences of stress and help them recover and develop to their full potential. Despite all that's known around the importance of the early years, the important role that investments in early years can have on improving outcomes and reducing inequalities, we still see that there's a lack of prioritization of early childhood in humanitarian and crisis-affected settings. The Ecd Development Group, with the support of the Moving Minds Alliance, did a really fascinating analysis of investments in early childhood development over the past few years and found that for ODA funding, only 3% of development funding in crisis and conflict-affected settings targeted children for 0 to 5, and very, very little of that focused on early learning, 1%, less than 1%. Humanitarian aid is even a smaller percentage of the total, with only 2% of humanitarian aid targeting children 0 to 5. If we look at changes in trends over the past few years, we've been greatly encouraged by the bank's leadership in driving total early childhood development and emergencies funding up 11% from 4% in 2013. So really commend the bank's leadership in this area and look forward to thinking through how we can continue that trend. At the IRC, we target early childhood development and think of early childhood development through a very cross-sectoral lens. And this is very much aligned with the World Health Organization and the World Bank and UNICEF's articulation of the Nurturing Care Framework as first articulated in the Lancet Commission. But it looks at early childhood development as the intersection of, as the result and the outcome of interrelated inputs, and that includes health and nutrition, safety and protection, responsive caregiving, and early learning. And IRC also works across these areas and tries to think through ways to provide cross-sectoral initiatives that support the holistic needs of the child. And we know that there have been some really exciting efforts that have combined both health and nutrition and early learning and are able to help us better address these holistic needs of children. The basic program models that we focus on for our conflict and crisis affected settings fall under two general categories. The first is really focused on programs for children. And this runs across the continuum from universal to more intensive type programs. So when we look at universal, our colleague Larry Aber at NYU calls this the air game, the sort of mass media initiatives that we know can reach children with high quality support for early learning, modeling responsive caregiving, with caregivers through mass media initiatives, whether that's television or digital or other means that we're providing direct content for children, and for children often to watch together with their caregivers. We often provide play and learning spaces when we're looking at the ground game or sort of those direct services inputs, where we can create modular, adaptable spaces in a variety of different contexts, where we can quickly train facilitators to provide engaging, meaningful experiences for young children. And then in more intensive programs, we focus on things like preschool settings, where we try to work very closely with the local ministries to enhance the learning materials, to ensure that we're providing the teachers and facilitators with the training and professional development support they need to provide these high quality experiences. And then the second umbrella is really targeting families and caregivers. And we know, as mentioned in Laura's opening remarks, that psychosocial distress is a significant factor for caregivers who are living in these contexts, and so we embed that within all of these approaches. And again, this spans the continuum from universal, which is more of the digital and mass media approaches, to modular approaches for group sessions or other types of initiatives, to home visits, such as the Reach Up and Learn program, which we've adapted for this setting. So to focus on Ahlan Simsim, and I'll pass it to my colleague Chantal in just 1 minute, but we've learned that there are specific adaptations that are required, and this includes increasing focus on caregiver well-being, stress and coping, thinking about shortened program length to address population movements, regular retraining to account for population movements also, take-home materials to reinforce messages, as well as engagement of communities. As Chantal will provide more details of our experience in Lebanon, our initiative in Ahlan Simsim really focuses on 4 different countries, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan, that has at sort of its core, the focus on evidence-based early childhood programming, taking what we know from the global evidence base and applying it and adapting it in these contexts, and really focusing on our overarching impact that a generation of children can grow to be healthy, productive, kind adults, and that societies have greater social cohesion and are more peaceful. And this is the integration of both that mass media approach with direct services, and then thinking through how we can scale those together with local partners and ministries and government, and how we can ensure sustainability so that they are not something that is just part of this response, but embedded in the government systems for any future crisis. And with that, I will hand it to my colleague Chantal.
Casey. Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today. And I apologize if my connection is not so good. I've been having an unstable connection today. I'll take it from where Casey stopped and focus more on the scaling. So what we wanted to do as Ahlan Simsim is to make sure that this is not a project that by the end of the 5 years, this project is achieving its goals, but not making a permanent impact. And as Katie said, our permanent impact and desired impact is to affect the children and the overall society at the end. Hence, our aim to work on scaling. And for us as IRC and Ahlan Simsim, we define scaling as growing, not growing a specific model, but extending, deepening, and sustaining impact. The way we work to ensure this is happening is to ensure like there's an approach that focuses on evidence-supported materials. And this is what Katie was talking about and what we care about of ECD, quality ECD that is evidence-based. And how can we make sure this evidence-based solutions that we're providing are adaptable? And why do we need them to be adaptable? Because we must make sure once we're scaling that this lines up with the national priorities. So we need materials or components, or what we prefer to call in the scaling world, the offerings that could be adapted based on the needs and the emerging needs and changing needs of the communities we work with. We also make sure in our approach that policymakers, practitioners, and donors perceive this intervention that we are providing as preferable to the status quo or any other solution that is being provided for ECD. However, this is not possible without clear and very strong partnerships and alliances, such as the one we're having with the American University of Beirut that Rana will talk more about. So based on all of this, we started working on scaling. I'll deep dive now into Lebanon. And as Katie said, we work in 4 countries. And we work on scaling for Ahlan Simsim in Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan. However, for today, and we'll take a case study and an example, one of the solutions or works we're doing with one of the ministries in Lebanon. So if I deep dive and I give a quick context of the Lebanese Ecd status. So in Lebanon, early childhood development is not deprioritized, but not prioritized as well. This is a country that for the past 18 months to 2 years have been going through a lot of issues, from economic to financial to COVID-19 restrictions, and the country has been struggling to respond to the needs of the communities that are emerging and growing. So we wanted to make sure, while this is being done, that ECD is still on the table. There is a national ECD strategy in development in Lebanon that different ministries work on, including the Ministry of Social Affairs, and to which like this case study belongs. Also, the Ministry of Public Health works with them, and the Ministry of Education. We as Ahlan Simsim work with these 3 ministries on different solutions that respond to the needs of ECD in Lebanon. With the Ministry of Social Affairs and also with the Ministry of Public Health, we focused on daycares and nurseries. And this is where we'll go and focus more on the specific pathway and why we're discussing this pathway or presenting this pathway today. So when we started discussing where could be the priority, and when we said we started discussing, it wasn't an internal discussion. It was with all key stakeholders and most importantly with key actors in the different ministries. And we've heard from ministries that nurseries and daycares are a priority. We agree on this for several reasons, of which the brain development starts at a very early age, and hence the need to invest time and effort in ensuring nurseries and daycares provide services for growth. At the same time, investing in early childhood development leads to better impact on school, like less school dropouts and better impact on schooling and education in the future, which on the long term as well has a return on investment for the country. Add to it, supporting nurseries and daycares in a way is women empowerment, because it allows women who don't have long maternity leave to be able to also go back to the workforce and support economically the country, and also feel that they can be productive and they can have their children grow in a healthy and satisfying way. Based on that, we started our discussion with the Ministry of Social Affairs, and now I'll go more deeply into what we have worked on with this ministry specifically. So we started discussions pretty early, And discussion started with what are the gaps and what do you perceive the role of Ahlan Simsim to be. And this is the approach we have for scaling, rather than we want to implement this project at the ministry. And with the ministry, we identified several issues that we can work on together. First of all, that daycares in Lebanon accept children who are older than 2, potty trained and can walk. And then the question is, what about children younger than 2, where the mothers have to go back to work and the maternity leave has ended? And then we did a quick assessment of a random sample of these different daycares, and we've seen there's a need to put a lot of resources to provide and support the infrastructure of these daycares. At the same time, there's a need also to invest in the capacity and the skills of the facilitators and teachers. And what we mean by capacity and skills is not looking at the capacity or skill as training and capacity building as we usually do, but also provision of curriculum, provision of materials that can help the growth process. What was very important as well and key and mentioned in several key meetings with different technical focal points and different decision makers in the ministry is the need for standards and policies that govern different daycares that are all over the country. In view of all of these problems, we discussed with our partners, the Ministry of Social Affairs, and we worked closely with them to come up with a pathway. What we call a scaling pathway provides an overview of what are we scaling, where are we scaling it, and with whom are we scaling. So this is where we're looking at a play-based ECD programming, specifically in the Ministry of Social Affairs, SDC, and daycares. So this is exactly what we call a scaling pathway. What we're looking to work on is to reach a point where we have improved provision and access of quality, inclusive, play-based ECD services for all children, most importantly, the most vulnerable. And here I have to also emphasize that the SDC daycares cater for all children, regardless of nationality or status or anything. So all children can access the SDC daycares and have the ability to go there. So we looked at improvement existing ECD curricula based on the problems I have just shared, looking at training and providing materials for teachers and facilitators, ensuring quality standards, and make sure we can expand to more areas and have more daycares as well. In order to succeed in this intervention and to be able to lead something that we can call at the end successful scaling, which means having lasting impact on all children in Lebanon, we have to make sure throughout, and this is what we have learned so far, that this pathway is led by the Ministry of Social Affairs. So in all of our meetings, we say the ministry leads the pathway, we facilitate the process for that. And this makes sure that once there's ownership, there's more works toward the pathway, there's more investment in it as well. We focus on the needs rather than the solution itself. So we're happy to refine, we're happy to change activities based on the ministry's needs, as long as it really responds to what the youngest children in Lebanon need and their caregivers. As Katie said, we are sure, and this is what we've been discussing for a long time with the ministry as well, that the funding is not funding for now. So what we need to ensure for scaling to be successful is how can we resource for the intervention at scale. If we're talking about catering for all the children all over Lebanon, providing quality services, daycare, this needs resources and investment. So how do we make sure these resources are available and embedded within the existing system to ensure the proper growth of children? And all of the work, like this is not a work done in solo. Like I've said at the beginning, the ECD strategy is in development. Similar to the ECD strategy, there's other things in the system that are influencing our ability to provide these quality services and quality ECD daycares. So it's very important for us to shift to a system mindset, a system thinking, whereby we create strong alliances and all together we work for ensuring that these daycares are of great quality for the Lebanese children, and hence better community development and better society in the future as well. And one of the strong alliances we were able to achieve and do is the alliance and partnership we have today with the American University of Beirut, that now I will give it to, and specifically the Knowledge to Policy Center, and now I'll give it to Rana to explore it more and discuss it more and introduce it more to you.
Thank you so much, Chantal, and the moderator and Kitty for the introductions. I'm thrilled to be here with you today to discuss more on our work and on our collaboration. But before I dive into it, I want to give the rationale on why we really need to work on scale. Why do we really need to work on system-level changes and policies? So in Lebanon, as you know, it's not only just an issue of immediate crisis or a current crisis that we are dealing with. It's a protracted crisis. Lebanon has been going through years and years of continuous political turmoil, instability, and uncertainty. And in those situations, working beyond the basic needs becomes a true necessity. While humanitarian aid in general has been critiqued for working on very important but yet vertical and unsustainable interventions related to basic clinical care, relief, wash, and so on and so forth, a paradigm shift should now be taking place to acknowledge and also address the upstream factors that affect the health and well-being of our children. Truly, how can we ensure an equitable access for child services and child well-being in general and their families without addressing the structural, political, social, and even commercial determinants that affect those interventions, whether their adoption or implementation or even their success? So as such, we truly need to work on those factors beyond what we usually learn and what we usually do and beyond our comfort zone. And we start working collectively in a multi-sectoral umbrella on different factors that might affect the adoption and implementation and success of the interventions that we provide. While some factors we understand that remain beyond our control, we as public health practitioners, global health professionals, funders, implementers, researchers can and should address those factors. And it is our duty to do so while relying on the best available evidence out there. While scanning the horizon on the best approaches for evidence-informed policymaking and the different frameworks and success stories that have been done elsewhere on evidence-informed policymaking and decision-making and working on system-level changes, we know that the common features for any successful intervention at that level is that they have to be impact-oriented, engaging high-priority issues identified by policymakers, researchers, and practitioners, relies on the best available evidence, but also packages this evidence via knowledge translation tools and tools that makes it easy for policymakers to understand and also use. Ensuring multi-sectoral and collaborative process, really this is a key feature, otherwise it won't be successful. And also influencing decision-making via citizen engagement, power and politics analysis, advocacy, policy dialogues, and also heavy media and stakeholder engagement to increase the likelihood of policy influence and improved and sustained health outcomes. Truly, these features for successful health policy interventions are all embedded within the knowledge translation science. And this is what is the specialty of the K2P Center. A brief background on K2P. K2P is a center established under the Faculty of Health Sciences at the American University of Beirut. It's a forerunner in synthesizing evidence, contextualizing knowledge, and engaging stakeholders to impact health, policy, and action in Lebanon and in the region. We have been designated twice as a WHO collaborating center for evidence-informed policymaking. We have extensive experience in knowledge translation, evidence-informed decision-making. We have signature mentorship programs to allow countries to excel and be designated as go-to centers for evidence-informed decision-making in their entire region. We are also the co-hosts of HSR 2020, the largest and most prestigious gathering for health policy and systems researchers in the world. So throughout our experience and our work, we have worked on multiple projects related to child health and well-being, and also being part of the commission on of the UNICEF, Lancet, WHO, and Lancet Commission on realigning child health in the SDG era. We have a social duty and the duty to work towards the children, towards the well-being of the children in Lebanon. And within the current economic and health crisis in Lebanon that we are going through, daycares and nurseries can truly be as a safety net and ensure an opportunity for missed children's education, well-being, nutrition, playtime, proper development, so on and so forth. And in order to do so, we truly need to address the system level factors that would address the barriers towards realizing those objectives. As such, we work through an exceptional collaboration with the IRC and in close partnership with the Ministry of Social Affairs and the Ministry of Public Health in order to promote the well-being of children between 0 to 5 years old by ensuring healthy, child-friendly, inclusive, and safe daycares and nurseries in Lebanon. What we will be doing throughout this project is that we will be producing evidence-informed yet contextualized standards for daycares in Lebanon. However, what is very important about this program is that it does not only provide those standards as just those are the standards you can publish, you can use, or you cannot use. It's not only about that. If you want to ensure sustainable and successful intervention, you have to work on different levels of this program in order to ensure its adoption. First of all, it has to include system-level changes, a cultural shift also in the way daycares and nurseries function in Lebanon. It has to rely on the best available evidence, but also it has to be contextualized to the Lebanese context. And also they have to be done in a very engaging and very collaborative process with all different stakeholders who are very important. And this is the key feature truly to any important or successful project that addresses the system level changes. Engaging stakeholders is essential because that would ensure their buy-in and their ownership of the program. And as such, that will lead to the sustainable implementation of policies and interventions. What is also very important about engaging all levels of stakeholders, including policymakers, researchers, media, and even citizens themselves, is that you will get the tacit knowledge that you will find nowhere in any published evidence or in any published literature or any intervention. It is the know-how and the experience that is on the ground, and they are only the ones who can hold it and who can share it. So this is very important to make sure that whatever standards we are proposing are truly standards that can be adopted and implemented. Also, having more stakeholders supporting you throughout this entire program helps you get more advocates on your side, increase your area and or your scope of coverage. And whenever we want to discuss engaging citizens themselves in the process of designing policies and also standards, we are basically discussing their basic human rights within the Al-Ma'ata, Sustainable Development Goals. This is their right. We're really not providing anything new. However, in our part of the world, it is something new to engage citizens and ask them for their opinions and their values about a certain policy. And engaging those citizens will actually lead to better policy implementation, compliance, better services, improved health outcomes, transparency, accountability, citizen empowerment, you name it. The benefits of engaging citizens can go on and on in order to make sure that whatever you are proposing will in fact be embedded within the system, and you will have advocates from citizens asking for those policies and also implementing them all at once. What is one of the most important features of this program as well, and in order to ensure its sustainable implementation, is not only working on the technical aspects of developing the standards, but also working on the implementation aspect of it through developing tools for implementation, training modules for the implementers, training those implementers, piloting those standards, making sure that they are successful, and also working on the political support, engaged stakeholders, and citizen support. Political support is truly instrumental, and as such, before any step inside that program, we initiated collaborations with the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Social Affairs to let them own this project, to make sure that they will in fact support this smooth implementation of this project, but also embed it within their system later on. And this is truly one of the main important features that any institution, whether in Lebanon or in any other context, fragility or not working in fragility settings, everyone should be working on system level changes in the design of their interventions, multi-sectoral support and engagement throughout those designing phase, rather than just going at the end of the intervention thinking of, okay, how can we work and how can we ensure sustainability? Truly, it doesn't happen this way. Once you want to ensure sustainability and scale and system level changes, it has to be from day one, throughout the conceptualization of the aim and the objectives of the program that you are working through every single step, and how you engage it, making sure that your processes are evidence-informed, your content is evidence-informed, and the way that you are doing it is truly engaging and bottom-up. Thank you so much. This is all, and I will be happy to take on other questions, further questions later.
Thank you so much to each of our speakers. That was illuminating and interesting and compelling. I would like to start with a general question, and I'd like each of you to answer, please, from your perspective, which is, what lessons have you learned during your engagement to date with this exciting project that you would pass on to others who are interested in designing and implementing something similar in their institution and in their countries? Why don't we start in the same order in which we presented with you, Katie? Thank you.
Great, thank you. An excellent and difficult question, but so important. I think both Chantal and Rana hit upon a lot of the issues that are that really emerge for me when I think about the challenges that need to be addressed. And as humanitarians, we're often facing this challenge of wanting to act very quickly, wanting to address the urgent and immediate needs, often taking programs from global contexts and quickly implementing it, but then really forgetting that these are often longer term issues, the average length of displacement being over 10 years, and that we need to build in sort of systems thinking, co-design with the local populations from the start. And this requires time and resources that are typically not available for humanitarian funding, but we really need to build that in from the start for continuous improvement. And I'll leave it there for my colleagues.
Thank you, Katie. I'll take it from there and add to it, like, for scaling, learning is very important, and it makes scaling more richer, and it makes it more effective if we're collecting learning as we're going. As we've started scaling with the IRC almost a year ago, we've collected some learnings. One of them, all of us, I think, have said throughout our presentation, is about ownership. So for me, the main important learning is who is owning this intervention at scale and who wants to take it forward, and how do we make sure we involve key stakeholders, as Rana said, from the design forward, and not at the end of the day when they're involved in the implementation only. So learning is very important. Also, what was very interesting for us is looking at the needs rather than the solutions we're providing. So how can we adapt our models? How can we adapt what we're proposing so that they respond to the needs without losing the identity we're coming in? Definitely, we have a loyalty to our identity as Ahlan Simsim program, but how do we make sure what we're building is evidence-based and is adaptable to respond to the needs of the ministries and the key stakeholders we're working with? I'll keep the rest for Rana.
Thank you so much. Because you mentioned a lot about this program in general, and I've touched upon a lot of the lessons learned and the important key features for any successful intervention, I will touch upon the lessons learned that we have learned during the COVID situation. And in Lebanon, I wish that we can say that COVID was the only challenge. Lebanon is now experiencing one of the most critical hardships in its current history, with a dire economic crisis on top of the global recession and a political instability, current revolution against corruption, weakened healthcare systems, weak infrastructure and resources, and also the despair of the Lebanese, all have been ingredients to one of the most difficult situations that any health policy expert could face throughout their work on system-level changes. And in fact, those continuous changes and shifts in priorities and constantly emerging problems. Every day we are facing a new problem, and the new problem is more important than the previous one, and then priorities shift and change, and policymakers shift with it, and the media shift with it. And it's very difficult for policy experts to continue to work on system-level changes throughout this ever-changing situation. Truly, those can impede and influence the system-level changes. Yet, hardships as those can be seen as opportunities for change. And I say this because the current revolution and the current situation that Lebanon is going through has shown the fragility of the system that we have, and has also arised the need for working on system-level changes. And because now everyone is clear on the need on working on system-level changes, our work becomes more critical than ever. And as such, this is an opportunity for all of us, and mainly funders, to work on system-level changes, policy-level changes in situations with protracted crisis. This is mainly my main message.
Thank you so much. And I also just want to encourage everyone who's listening to please write in. We've received a few questions, but please, this is your chance to ask any questions or make some comments, which I'll be happy to share with our distinguished panel. And so one question that we have, actually speaking of COVID, let me also mention that I hope at some point in the future we will be able to come back to what we had planned for the live event in the Fragility Forum, which included a display of the tent that's used for the Ahlan Simsim program with all of the materials that were there. We were even going to try to get some Muppets to come to have demonstrations of the interactive sessions that are conducted, and we were really looking forward to that, and we're sorry that we can't share that with you because it would have been a wonderful hands-on experience that obviously this webinar cannot replicate. But we will collectively invite you back and do it again in the future with all of the updates and lessons that we will have learned from this experience. So speaking of COVID, we are now in what will surely be looked back on as the COVID era. And Rana, thank you. You started to mention some of this, but I'd like to turn to our other two panelists to ask them about what has the COVID era meant in terms of adapting and implementing this program. I think there are already a lot of lessons that can be learned from working in fragile and conflict settings to more generally working in the COVID era, and certainly you all also have had to adapt your own programming and implementation, so we'd be delighted to hear about that. Thank you. So over to maybe Chantal and Katie. Thank you.
So if I want to say, maybe I'll start with how COVID has influenced our scaling efforts, and we'll leave it to Katie to explore more and share the amazing work that the technical team have done in the Ahlan Simsim, along with our partners and supportive partners to ensure responding well to COVID. So for scaling, and as I said before, scaling for us is embedded in the needs of the community. And as COVID started, the needs have shifted and the priorities have shifted. So we made sure conversations continue with scaling partners. And in our efforts to ensure their ownership of the process, we also looked at what are these changing needs and what could be potential solutions to support them. So today, rather than saying we're developing this specific intervention, every intervention has different approaches. So we're taking into consideration whether it's the crisis that we're in today or future crisis, and how to make sure whatever is integrated inside the existing system is something that could be easily changed so that it becomes remote or distant to support the family. As this is what COVID has taught us, that at any moment we can lose the face-to-face in-person interaction. So we have to be prepared to be able to respond to this and still cater for the needs of the community meanwhile.
Great. And I'll just add that I think we had some advantage in that the original design did include these mass media strategies and digital strategies for reaching caregivers and children, but this double emergency of the closure and restrictions and lockdowns caused by COVID on top of the existing crisis has really forced us to amplify those efforts and think creatively about how we can redesign some of our in-person services to address the particular needs of these populations. So this has included our team rapidly adapted some of our programming and some of the sort of key activities and messages focused on both caregiver well-being and reducing caregiver stress and reducing child stress, as well as specific activities for children based on their age that caregivers can do with very little resources at home. As well as COVID-19 specific messages focusing on the health and safety and well-being of these populations. We have been thinking through and continually sort of adapting and designing and testing ways to offer these messages, ways to make it more interactive. And this has even included, for example, for our Reach Up and Home visiting program, shifting to phone calls or phone-based support sessions that are much more individualized and personalized, talking through the sessions that are very much tailored to the developmental stage of each child. We will be conducting some rigorous, rapid randomized control trials of some of these initiatives with our partners at NYU Global Ties, and so we'll be really interested to see some of the results of that. The initial outcomes that we're looking at are more sort of around engagement and user preferences, but then we do hope to be able to capture more around sort of outcomes or even some of the proximal outcomes that we know are important to leading to child development. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Let me take another question that's come in. So recognizing the complexity of building consensus when designing scalable programs, what are typical time frames that you would anticipate before program implementation? Who would like to take that?
I can give it a try. So that's something that's very interesting, because this is where we shift from project mindset to system thinking. This is the startup. We as a humanitarians are mainly used to work in project-based activities. We have a very tight deadline and timeline to be able to present or offer a certain implementation. Luckily enough, Ahlan Simsim provides a wider and longer term for us to be able to explore and learn, and also give the time for consensus to take place. We said, we were always wondering if we have started scaling or no, until we had discussion with scaling experts who were supporting our scaling initiative and supporting us in these learnings, when they said, well, you're way into scaling because you've started in relationship building. So relationship building does take time, and getting to a point where we agree on the basics and the needs takes the time, and we should give it the time it needs. Because once we agree on these basics and we document the way forward, it becomes much easier to implement. For the past few months, we've had a lot of discussion with different key stakeholders that we call champions and the ministries we work with either in Jordan, in Lebanon, or in Iraq. And these discussions aim to build these relationships, to set up common needs, priorities, and take it forward from there. And I do believe thinking this way and making sure who are the other actors that we want to bring to the table to be part of this change is very important and it's key for us. So it does take time, but this is when you have scaling, you have to be patient.
Thank you so much. Let me take one more question. What tools, resources, or guidance or standards would help you to implement your programs even better, and why? So this is a big question, but I think one that people will be interested in because these are the tools and resources that could be made available also to others. So I don't know, Katie, maybe you want to take that one? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is an issue that comes up quite often. We also have a task team with the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies that's focused on ECD. And this has been something that that includes partners from all over the world and multiple different organizations. But this is an issue that has been raised several times by them as a critical need. At the same time, we are working with the World Health Organization to think through how the recommendations for early childhood development can be adapted for humanitarian and crisis-affected contexts. And so that is a short brief that we're engaging with multiple stakeholders for their kind of review and inputs that hopefully we'll be able to put out in the next few months. So look forward to that. I think that there's no one sort of recipe for implementing in humanitarian contexts, except for some key considerations and guidance around, co-design with local partners, building in sensitivity to the needs of pregnant women and young children from the very start in the assessment phase or the even preparedness phase that often are too absent, so we don't have the evidence or the data needed to help inform decisions around what is needed and what should be done, all the way through to the very kind of minimum standards around implementation. So I do think this is something that is a need, but we are trying to work on addressing that gap through this task team and through these other efforts at the global level. I think Chantal might have more specifics on kind of the Middle East perspective.
I was just about to suggest that, indeed. Chantal or Rana, if you all would like to weigh in on this from your perspective, being there implementing in the Middle East, about what tools, resources, or guidance would help you with implementation. We'd be delighted to hear from you as well.
Anna, would you like to go first?
Yeah. Thank you so much. So in fact, what I want to focus on here is the process itself, rather than just the tool. The process is very important, and as Chantal mentioned just a while ago, engaging the stakeholders starting from day one, from the priority setting, throughout the development of the tools, and throughout the implementation of the project is the key to make it successful. And is the key to really invest in your time properly rather than working a lot on the tool itself and the technique before working on its implementation. The process is what makes it or break it. And as engaging you are in the process, it becomes more successful. From our experience through multitude of knowledge translation projects in Lebanon and also worldwide, we know for a fact that using policy briefs using policy dialogues, using advocacy strategies, engaging citizens, engaging media, conducting a lot of personalized debriefings with stakeholders. Those are the key processes that will help you ensure sustainable and successful and impactful interventions. As for the content, as long as all stakeholders agree on it, then it's fine. The tool will not be, it is important, but it won't be as important as the process that led you to that tool.
If I might add as well, like my colleagues have discussed the tools and the guidance, I would like to say what's important for success is to think of the intervention when it is at scale, beyond the lifetime of the project, and this is where it needs the involvement of different stakeholders and better understanding of the interaction and system, even bigger than the country we're working in, which systems can support the continuity and support the quality services of these, the quality provision of these services. Similar to the relationship and the presentation we have the chance to do today with World Bank, is having similar chances to discuss this initiative, to be able to explore it with you all, and to be able to think together how can we ensure we can support these initiatives to go further and be able to serve children not only for the lifetime of the Ahlan Simsim program, but even beyond that.
Thank you so much. No, this is an area where the communities need to come together on this work, and certainly to develop these resources which are so critical. And I know that you all have already shared a great deal, and there's a lot of sharing and adaptation going on also right now in response to COVID, with a lot of the Sesame workshop work and the adaptation, some of which Katie mentioned. And we also have pulled resources and tools together through the early years, and particularly also with the Early Childhood Development Global Solutions Group at the World Bank. So I would invite people to share those and be in touch with all of us. It is 10 o'clock. Unless there's a burning question right now, I think I would like to go ahead and wrap up and thank the Fragility Forum team, thank the team that has supported us to make this an excellent event technically. I don't think there were any glitches, so thank you very much. And to thank the Investing in Early Years team as well. This has been a very nice partnership. Most importantly, of course, to thank our speakers, the collaborators on the Ahlan Simsim program. We learned from Katie about the importance of prioritizing investments in responsive and protective care and early learning. And I was particularly struck by how Katie was able to emphasize that this is not just a development issue, but it is also an equity issue. So you spoke to our heads and our hearts, and we thank you for that. Chantal, thank you for guiding us down the path of what it takes to actually do this, and the importance of partnerships between policymakers, practitioners, and donors, and the importance of sharing lessons and information. And thank you, Rana, for giving us that systems perspective on scale and sustainability, and how having impact-oriented interventions requires the use of evidence-based solutions, but then ensuring that those can be easily and effectively applied, and that those are also broadly supported by a range of stakeholders, including through the media and through very effective communications campaigns. So it's my pleasure to close, to thank all of you for attending, to please be in touch if you have additional suggestions or questions, and have a very good day or evening. Goodbye.